I'm Lisa Grabinski. You are listening to Blue Sky. We have put in requests for the leaders of all of the parties running in this provincial election campaign. The Saskatchewan United Party, another new entity in the Saskatchewan political landscape. The party was created by former Saskatchewan Party MLA Nadine Wilson. Listeners may remember she became a vocal critic of the Sask Party's management of the pandemic. She resigned from the Sask Party caucus in 2021 when it was revealed she lied about her COVID-19 vaccination status. In November of 2022, the Saskatchewan United Party was registered with Elections Saskatchewan, and Nadine Wilson became the first member in the legislature. The party attracted more members, including our guest today. Jon Hromek is now the leader of the Saskatchewan United Party. In August of 2023, he was a candidate in the Lumsden Morse by-election. He finished second to the Saskatchewan Party. But that by-election was important because one of the big issues was parental involvement in the education system, which we know the Saskatchewan Party took notice of because they went on to use the notwithstanding clause to introduce the Parental Bill of Rights legislation. Now that brief history lesson is over, I would like to welcome Jon Hromek to the program. Welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So that's quite the history lesson that we gave there. But what personally drew you to the Saskatchewan United Party?
Well, I mean, I've kind of seen the evolution that's taken place within the Sask Party since they've come to power. And realistically, let's look at it. The Sask Party will, going on this year, be in power for 17 years. And we've just seen just a slide, I would say a slide away from maybe some of their original conservative roots. And I come from the oil industry, and I as you know, is heavily regulated and have had lots of dealings with the government, whether it's the senior bureaucrats or the elected officials. And they just were not taking our concerns into play, or the concerns of the people, for that matter. And in reality, I mean, Saskatchewan, you could say, is been governed or is under a two-party system. But in reality, for the last 17 years, it really hasn't been a two-party system. It's been basically a one-party, a uniparty system of the Sask Party. I mean, in the last three elections alone, 2012, they won 49 seats. 2016, they won 51 seats. And in 2020, they won 48 seats out of 61. Like, we're not talking about majority governments here. We're talking about a super majority government. So basically, they became complacent and not wanting to listen to the people, because in reality, when we would sit down and have concerns with them, at the end of the day, when you could get an MLA to call you back, what they would end up saying is, well, who else are you going to vote for? And I was hearing this right across the province, both in Regina and Saskatoon, so you hear this urbanly as well as rurally. And, I've never run for anything before in my life. I'm not RM council, not town council, anything, but it was just coming to a place where it's like, man, we need a third party in Saskatchewan. We need a conservative party in Saskatchewan. And so I put my name forward. I saw that a new party had been started. I knew some of the founders. And they started this party for the same reasons. It was just disenfranchised with the Sask Party. And a lot of them were original Sask Party founders. And so I wanted to help out. They wanted me to run as a candidate, but I had an oil company. We were oil producers in southeast Saskatchewan, so I was busy. I had employees, I had other commitments and responsibilities. But when the incident happened at Lumsden School,
what incident?
That sex card incident
Right.
from when did it happen? June of 2023. When that happened, like, my oldest daughter, she was in that high school. A lot of her friends were in that actual classroom, the grade 9 classroom. And I said, well, enough's enough. We need some representation here on, with respect to some of these social issues that we're seeing in classrooms. And we've been seeing them for years. And it was time to get involved. And
so tell me more about that, because I really want to understand. I don't want to make any assumptions, and listeners are probably just as curious, but I want to understand what your take is on some of that. So you mentioned, you've got obviously a close connection to what happened at the Lumsden High School, but now as the Sask United Party, what is your stance on education and the role teachers play, whether that's for sex education and I know that you have a take on gender. So just maybe outline it for us. Like, what does your party stand for in that regard?
Well, first and foremost, I want your listeners to know that, I was raised by two teachers. So, like, both my parents were teachers. My dad was a principal. My mom was an English teacher. And so I understand education, and I do understand that it is an extremely tough job, especially with where society has gone. There are a lot of demands that are put on teachers. And so I always break up the curriculum component from the delivery component. So I'm going to separate those two. So on the delivery component, like the issues that we're facing today in Saskatchewan is a lot of those issues are related to delivery, like class complexity. That is a real thing. But even within class complexity, there's a massive difference between rural and urban. In rural parts of the province, they're just concerned about getting a teacher to come to the school because they don't want to lose their school. They know if they lose their school, they can lose the community, and that they don't want to do that. Whereas in the cities, like there are classrooms in the cities that 95% of the students are speaking English as a second language and not very well English.
How do you know that?
Well, we've done quite a bit of research on this thing, and we're talking to parents all the time. And we talk to teachers regarding this. So just imagine that level of complexity where you're dealing with a classroom where you've got a lot of students speaking English as a second language. You've got a lot of diverse needs. You've got overcrowding issues. Well, what is a teacher supposed to do with that? So we're looking at some structural issues within education that's being forced. So that is on the delivery component. We also know of the overcrowding and schools having to use, teachers' lounges, for example, teachers not having permanent space that are special resource teachers, so having to be mobile, issues on the delivery. Then I separate it into the curriculum part. The curriculum part is 100% within the provincial purview. It's 100% within the provincial jurisdiction. And we firmly believe that a lot of these social issues as it relates to, say, gender, as it relates to Pride Week, as it relates to these types of things, these are very sensitive type issues. And not one-size-fits-all solutions work for that.
Why do you see them as sensitive issues?
They're sensitive because parents have different standards with respect to them. There's different views on this. And what we were seeing is that the majority of the parents' view from the province were not being represented as it relates to these types of issues. Because there's been a lot of polling done on that shows that, say, for example, if we're talking about pronoun use and genders, 86% of the province agrees that parents should be involved in that discussion.
Sorry, who did that polling?
Angus Reid.
Angus Reid, okay.
Yeah.
Do you think the rights of parents trumps the rights of children? Like, what about the kids?
Yeah, well, exactly. But here, and that comes up a lot. But here's what I say to that. Okay, kids have rights. We understand that. But what about the rights of the parent in order to be responsible for the kid? Like, it's one thing to say, okay, my kid has the rights to do whatever they want, and we have to respect that right. But if you were a parent and you said, okay, well, if they can't even drive yet, if they can't even vote, where's that line?
Why are you so passionate about that? I think most people might walk through their day and haven't thought twice about that. And there's, classrooms full of kids right now. And I think a lot of medical experts will say it is a very small, portion of the population. So why are you so passionate about how this is handled in schools?
I'm very passionate about it because I see that the majority of parents, their views are not being represented in the legislature. So that's why I got involved, because in reality, and when I was out door knocking during the by-election and doing town halls after and different things, like that is one of the number one issues that comes to me all the time. It's like, John, I don't want my kid exposed to this in public education. So what can we do about this? And like people are, and there's a diverse view. There's no doubt there's a diverse view on the level. But in reality, for the most part, people are like, those are either a social issue or a political issue. And why can't we just get back to reading, writing, arithmetic, history, different things like that? Why can't we just get back to the foundation?
Should sex education be taught in schools?
See, sex education's interesting because, we've had some discussions about that in the past with media and just people in general, because because they're like, well, let's talk about what is sex education. Like, if sex education is just purely about, say, contraceptives and safe sex and things like that, that makes a lot of sense. But now we're moving into sexuality rather than just sex education. Like before, when I was a kid, it was more biologically based. And it was more like, okay, here's the dangers of STDs, here's the symptoms of it, here's, ways to protect yourself and different things like that. Which to me makes sense.
A lot of people might say, though, people who are, I don't know how old you are, but a lot of people who are older say that it wasn't adequate what they got.
Right.
We weren't having conversations about consent, as an example.
Right. Okay. But with respect to consent, you would think that would be, brought up in just, in teaching people to be respectful of each other and each other's opinions, of course, and not just opinion, but with respect to, bullying and different things of that nature. So that just doesn't relate to sex, but that relates to just in broader terms, right?
Healthy relationships. Maybe I should have called it that.
Yeah, relationships.
Instead of sex
That's
education.
just, broad-based sociology, right?
I know that you have more in your platform than just that. So,
but I am passionate about it. I'm glad that you brought that up.
But let's park it for just a bit because I want people to know a bit more about you. And actually, we have a caller on the line, so let's go to Darren in Regina. Darren, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi. I've just been listening here, and I've got a question. I'd be curious to see what your stance is on funding of private schools. And is it basically good enough that if the majority of people decide that teaching creationism in private schools in a Christian setting or otherwise, does that mean that should be allowed? Because enough people you polled say, yeah, we're in favor of that, so we're going to fund that. And right now, the government is funding those schools. Some of them, I think, are well recorded to be teaching not exactly the curriculum they're supposed to be. There's one in Saskatoon that's been very high profile. And I just wonder what your take is on that, and would you support continuing funding these schools?
That's a good question. In reality, here's how I view this personally. How I view this personally is if you want your kid to go to a Christian school and be taught a specific Christian curriculum, or if you want your kid to go to, say, a Muslim school and be taught, Islamic curriculum, then you should pay for it. I think public schools should be places that are free from ideology, any kind of political ideology or ideology in general. I myself went to a private school in Alberta for grade school, and there was no government funding whatsoever. My parents sacrificed a lot for me to be able to go to that school, and I did get a great education there. But that's where I stand on that, because in reality, public. This is where a lot of times we run into problems. Is if we say, well, what's okay and what's not okay. So when we say, with Sask United, when we say we want to remove political ideology from schools, well, that means all of it.
How would climate change fit into that?
Well, that's interesting, because that almost relates to, what we're finding, and there's another poll on it done recently, is parents are looking for a more balanced approach to things. So I firmly, I totally disagree with the idea of pushing, say, climate change from the perspective of this is an existential threat and we're scaring and fear-mongering children with respect to that, because there are different views on climate change. I, for one, myself, I firmly believe that, yeah, climate change exists. It's been happening since the beginning of time and will happen long after I'm gone. And, with respect to man-made climate change, yeah, I do believe in man-made climate change because man always has an effect on its environment. And today, currently in the world, there's more people than there really ever has been. So there's going to be an effect. How much of an effect that's where, I don't think that that's very well settled, and I don't think that that is being taught well in schools. So that is a perfect example of why basically what's happening in schools with respect to climate change is demonization of carbon and demonization of carbon dioxide. And I firmly disagree with that. Carbon dioxide is the gas of life. It's plant food. We shouldn't be demonizing it. But at the same time, we can talk about, yes, you as a person, to the students, you will have an effect on your environment. And that's why we need to, take steps to mitigate and do things of that nature.
I appreciate hearing your perspective on this. We have a couple of candidates on the line who we're going to talk to find out why they've been drawn to the Sask United Party. But just before I introduce them, how many candidates are you running?
We currently have 28 announced. There's 2 more that will be announced either later today or tomorrow, and then a couple more in the pipe. So we should be between that 32 to 35 range.
Okay. Well, let's say hello to a couple of your candidates. So Greg Burkich is a former Sask Party MLA. He's running in Saskatoon Southeast. Hello to you, Greg.
Hello.
And then we also have Cody Lockhart, candidate in Rostern Shellbrook. Hello to you, Cody.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for being with us. Cody, I want to start with you. Tell us about yourself. What made you want to run for the Sask United Party?
I was drawn to the Sask United Party because they are a true conservative party, both fiscally and socially, and that resonated quite a bit with myself and my family. They have good leadership under Jon Hromek, and the commitment to better management is what this province needs to turn around. We have the resources, we have the people. We just need better policies to create the environment where we can all prosper and flourish. And it's painfully evident that we don't have a money problem. We just have a management problem, and we need better management so that my family wants to live and work here, and I can continue to be here as well.
Greg Burkich, what about you? I want to know why you made the switch.
Basically a lot of the same reasons. The Saskatchewan Party, I don't think I left them. They left me. They were pretty well staying to the center, almost centered to the left. We got to get back to the basics of governing, which is health, education, and watch what we're spending. And not try to, even this election, you see both the NDP, Saskatchewan Party, tossing money out every day. Somewhere, and we're just running deficits, and sooner or later, we're gonna, if we ever crash, it could get pretty ugly here in this province. So we got to get our money management under control.
Cody Lockhart, what do you see as the main differences between the Sask United Party and the Sask Party? I mean, and there are other parties that are on the right, so now there's quite a bit of choice. So what I'm curious, what do you see as the main difference between the Sask United Party and the Sask Party?
I think the Sask Party has diverged significantly from their founding principles. What makes a conservative? Small government, low taxes, fiscal restraint, personal responsibility, individual freedom. Those things are just not evident in their policies anymore. They balanced 1 out of 9 budgets. They doubled the debt. They ballooned the bureaucracy. Those things are not indicative of a conservative government, and that's where the Sask United has filled a need, because Saskatchewan is a conservative province, and at the moment, nobody's filling that void. If the Sask Party was doing a good job and governing fiscally and socially conservatively, the Sask United Party would not need to exist, but they're more in step with the Liberals at the moment, and that's why we find ourselves here today.
Greg Burkich, what would you like to add to that, the main differences between the Sask United Party and the Sask Party?
He pretty well hit it the nail on the head. But, Sask autonomy, we need more of that with Ottawa. And I mean real autonomy when it comes to not like the Sask Party took them to court, which never affected anything here, and they knew they weren't going to win. I was there in government at the time. They pretty well said among themselves, the Supreme Court's not going to overturn that, but it was a good talking point for Scott, and he used it for 2 years. We need to get serious with Ottawa. We got 10 provinces in here. We need way more autonomy. In the states, there's 50 states, and they have way more rights per state than we have here. We're basically run by the feds, and that's got to change.
Jon Hromek, I want to give you a chance to talk about Saskatchewan autonomy. What does that look like? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, on the autonomy, the best way to have autonomy is to be able to take and hold strong stances. And the best way to hold strong stances is to manage your province well. If you are spending every dime that comes into the government, and you're not just spending every dime, but you're running deficit over deficit over deficit, what tends to happen is you're giving away your autonomy because you're creating a dependence on Ottawa. We know what Ottawa loves to do. Ottawa loves to use coercion by bribery. That's what they do. So, you want this program? Great. We'll give you some money, but then you need to accept all of these strings attached.
What if there's a change in government federally? What if we have a Conservative Party in power?
It doesn't, at the end of the day, what is Confederation? Confederation is a group of strong consenting provinces. And so I firmly believe that a strong confederation only happens when you have a strong province. How do you get a strong province? By managing your province well, by ensuring that you have buffers, buffers where you're not in too much debt, buffers that you can handle a geopolitical shock or a trade shock like we're seeing with Trudeau and the EV and the canola issues right now, things of that nature. So you have to manage what you manage well, and if you can do that and create buffers for you, then you can take strong positions. Our first position on autonomy would be to assume the exact same rights that Quebec has. If it's good for one province, it's good for another province.
Okay, I'd like to bring in a caller. Pam joins us right now in Anglin Lake. Pam, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
What's your question?
My question is, I just want to acknowledge that the SUP leader has referenced the Angus Reid polls, and I think we just need to be clear that when these polling questions occur, he stated that parents want to have some heart in discussion with their children and their students. As a recently retired teacher, I entirely understand that. But the way the questions are posed in polls doesn't necessarily support what he's stating. Parents, of course, want to have conversations and be included in curriculum decisions. And so if the question is just such that, do you want to be included? Of course, parents will answer yes. So I think the Angus Reid polling reference is a bit weak. My question is, the term ideology and political influences in the classroom is being used quite a bit by the leader. I'm wondering where he sits on the issue of instruction then about colonialism, the settlers' responsibility in our province to the demise and, the unhealthy circumstances for Indigenous communities and people. Where does he see that fit in classroom curriculum and acknowledging responsibility?
A good question, Pam. Thank you. Okay, I'll let you answer.
So we fully understand that the First Nations peoples of Saskatchewan have a unique and relationship with the federal government, and with that autonomous relationship with the federal government, which is unique, there has been problems with it. And so our approach to that whole situation is basically, we're here as a provincial government to support them in their relationship with the federal government. So whatever issues they have, and which are going to be very unique, because at the end of the day, we were just talking about autonomy. We're for autonomy. We're for Saskatchewan autonomy.
I think I just want to get really specific here because we only have a minute left. Teaching reconciliation, teaching the history of residential schools in the classroom. Because if you're talking about removing ideology from the classroom, what are your thoughts on teaching about reconciliation and the history of residential schools?
Well, history is history, and that's the way it has to be taught. It has to be taught not from necessarily the perspective of, what are we learning today with respect to looking backwards? But we have to look and provide full context in that. Of course, there's mistakes that have happened in history, and that's why we have to learn from it, but there's also good things that have happened in history. So I'm separating history from teaching about reconciliation. When we're talking about...
Can you do that?
Pardon?
Can you separate history from reconciliation?
Yes, because history is fact. History is fact. Reconciliation is about, what can we do now, go forward, in order to reconcile a relationship such that the historical context is, or the issues of the history don't continue to tear apart in the future. right? And I firmly believe that one way to do that is to actually, because what can happen is if we're always focused on our differences all the time, we are creating a society that is very tribal. We are creating a society that is very divided, and that can become very counterproductive. I think we need to spend much more time as a society teaching people about what we do have in common here in Saskatchewan. That's why our policy approach is good policy is good policy is good policy, and it works for all the peoples of Saskatchewan, while recognizing that our First Nations people are unique because they have a very unique relationship with the federal government.
I want to keep going, but you're hearing the music. They're playing us off.
Okay.
Like, this happens every day at this time.
Again, this has been fun.
I just really appreciate the time and this chance to learn from you. So thank you to you, Jon Hromek, and also Greg Burkich and Cody Lockhart, who are candidates. Thank you guys so much as well. And I should say that you are the leader of the Saskatchewan United Party, a candidate in Lumsden Morse. I'm Leisha Grabinsky. You've been listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1. Thanks for listening. We're going to continue this series with the leaders of some of the other parties. I'm Leisha Grabinsky. This is Blue Sky. We had a few more questions to ask Jon Hromek, leader of the Saskatchewan United Party, and he's agreed to stay to take some of your questions and to provide an answer. Jon Hromek is a candidate in Lumsden Morse, and so we'll get right into it. I've got an email here from Kevin who writes, do you believe that teaching children that gay and transgender people exist in society is inappropriate? Do you actually believe that teachers are indoctrinating children to become gay or transgender? Do you believe that it's possible that you personally have been indoctrinated into believing things that aren't true?
Okay, read the first part of that question again, please.
Do you believe that teaching children that gay and transgender people exist in society is inappropriate?
Yeah, I don't think that how I would address that is to be, it doesn't matter if someone is gay or transgender. They are still a person and worthy of respect, irrespective of their sexuality. That is the lesson that should be taught in schools. Rather than specifically, well, this sexuality, that sexuality, this sexuality, that. It's irrelevant because at the end of the day, the majority of people, like, when you're an adult, you're free to make your own decisions and go that way. But why do we respect people? Well, we respect them because at the end of the day, they're human. They're a human being. And that's why we respect them, irrespective of their sexuality.
Should those messages then, they'll be taught in school?
I don't understand why it needs to be so specific in school. That's what I don't understand. Because once you get specific, then where does it end, right?
I don't know if I fully understand what you mean by specific.
Well, specific meaning like, okay, so why... because basically what you're trying to say is or maybe what the caller is getting at is to be, if we don't specifically identify a group, well, then that will lead to bigotry against that group. But I don't think it would. Why would it lead to bigotry against the group? It doesn't matter what someone's sexuality is.
Although over the years I've interviewed several trans people, and they've shared their experiences of hate, of having to navigate a world that can be quite cruel. And I've heard many trans people say that if they had role models when they were younger, if they had anything that they could look to, that they would have been happier and healthier.
Yeah, but wouldn't that have come from the community rather than from school? See, that's where I think we need to be careful as to, and then if we're for identifying groups, early on, then what age group are we okay identifying groups at? And that's where I'm like, because parents are some will say, well, it's okay at grade 4. Some will say it's okay at grade 8. Some will say it's okay at, grade 12. Why even identify the group? It goes back to my comment about if we're always focused on, differences all the time, then it's actually leading society to become more differentiated as compared to why don't we focus on, what unifying factors. Unifying factors, if a trans person is still a person, that's the unifying factor. A gay person or is still a person.
But if we're constantly debating them, do they fully feel like a person?
But that's why I'm saying, why are we even bringing it up? Because then we're not debating it. Like if that's what I've seen, and I've seen this in my personal life. Like my brother, he's gay, and he lives in Toronto, and I mean, this was way, he's 8 years younger than I was, this was way before schools were even talking about this stuff. And I don't think he felt alienated. I don't think, he was always, he was just a little different, which is okay. But we still, people ask me, well, do you love your gay brother? I don't love my gay brother because he's gay. I love him because he's my brother. Do you know what I mean? It's irrespective. And he could decide one day to become trans. And to me, I would be like, well, whatever. Whatever.
What if he told you that some of the things that your party stands for are harmful?
Well, what? Like what? What is harmful about what I'm talking about? Because what I'm talking about is I don't think that schools is the right forum to have these discussions.
I want to ask you the second part of the question again from Kevin. So Kevin says, do you actually believe that teachers are indoctrinating children to become gay or transgender?
I guess that would depend upon, what's his definition of indoctrination. I think that when you're teaching kids, especially at a young age, or especially even when they're teens and they're questioning their identity and things like that, and you're even suggestive at all to be like, well, maybe you are gay, or maybe you're like this because you're this, or anything like that. I mean, that's pretty suggestive. I'm not saying that the person is, purposely indoctrinating it or not, but the messaging in and of itself is very suggestive to someone who is actually struggling in their identity, struggling to understand who they are, struggling to navigate a world that is tremendously challenged at this point in time, sexually. We know that, because what's permissive today and compared to before, or just what's more in the mainstream narrative today compared to even 20 years ago is very different. And I don't think that our children have the mental and the ability to handle it, or more I'm struggling for the right word, like the not the awareness, but the maturity to even be discussing things like that.
Let's leave that one. I've got one from Maria who writes, wondering about conflict of interest. Would you give up your oil company if you were elected?
I already did. I sold it. The only reason I agreed to, when the party executive asked me, they went through a process when Nadine stepped down to become leader, or when she stepped down, they went through a process, the leadership process. And before that, I had decided, there's no way I could even be an MLA and run my oil company. But let alone be the leader and do that. So I sold it in May of this year. So I like that question because I am shocked with how many MLAs are running businesses on the side. Like, I get it maybe if it's passive and you're in opposition, but if you're in government, like, that is the definition of a conflict of interest from my perspective, even if you're around the cabinet table. Because I know with Jeremy Cockrell, some stuff is coming out, about some investments in, helium and things like that. Like that, you shouldn't even, that shouldn't even be a thing. And with respect to his, I think it's a window and door business that he has in North Battleford and different stuff. I personally believe if you're doing your job in government, you shouldn't have the time to run or be part of a business.
Got a question from Jan who emailed. Jan says, I'm a 76-year-old woman. What is your platform on abortion? Do you consider it a woman's right to choose her own path on that subject? Well,
that is that's a federal question, 100% federal question. I will, though, say, like, my personal opinion, I am pro-life personally. But that's a federal question. So the way she's asking that that's a federal question. So, we can't weigh in on that. Or, well, we can weigh in on it, but if we have no jurisdiction over it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.